A chassid who was a wealthy merchant once came to Reb Menachem Mendel of Lubavitch, the Tzemach Tzedek, for permission to divorce his wife. The chassid was worried, for he knew that the rabbi regarded marriage as one of the pillars of existence and rarely gave his blessing for divorce. Nor would the man do anything without his Rebbe's permission, for the Rebbe was the pillar of his life. So he was quite tense when he came to the Rebbe's house and requested an audience. The chassid arrived just before breakfast. Indeed, the first thing that struck him as he walked inside the house was the delicious smell of food. He had left before dawn in order to reach the Rebbe's house, for he hoped to return to his work before the end of the day. The Rebbe's wife seated him in the living room, but she did not invite the man to join them for breakfast. From where he sat, he saw the Rebbe enter his study to put on his tefillin, and he heard him chanting prayers. Even though the rabbi twice passed by the door of the living room, he did not look up, and he did not seem to notice the chassid sitting there. The morning passed. The rabbi did not emerge from his study, nor did any others come to the house. The man wondered why no other petitioners came that day, and why the Rebbe did not call him into his study. Before long it was time for lunch. The man, who had not eaten since the night before, was tormented by the tantalizing sense of the cooking food. But still he was left to sit alone. Again the Rebbe passed the doorway twice, but did not give any indication that he had seen him. By evening the man was exhausted, now with hunger and waiting, but still there was no sign of the rabbi. Now the delicate smells of dinner reached him, tormenting him, in particular the smell of kugel, which he loved. If only they would take notice of him and invite him to join them for dinner, but they did not. By the time the dinner ended, the man was so deeply worried about the meaning of the rabbi's actions that he was greatly relieved when the rabbi's wife came to him shortly thereafter and led him to the rabbi's study. When the rabbi walked into the study, he was struck again with the smell of kugel, even more potent than it had been in the living room. At the same moment, he saw the rabbi with a plate of kugel before him. Reb Menachem Mendel looked up at him, his eyes gleaming, and asked him why he had come. Then the chassid poured out his heart about his wife, who had failed to give him a child for almost 10 years, so that there would be no one to say Kaddish, the prayer for the dead, for him. And since it is permitted to divorce a childless woman after that time, he had come to seek the Rebbe's permission. The Rebbe stood up, taking the plate of kugel in his hand, and offered it to the chassid. "Here," he said, "first eat some kugel, then we will talk." At that moment, the man remembered that he was famished, and he gladly took the plate of kugel, picked up a piece, and took a bite of it. It was the most delicious food he had ever tasted, and yet, strange to say, he had taken no more than a single bite when his hunger was gone. And at that moment the rabbi spoke. "Go now, and know that I have approved your request. There shall be a get, a bill of divorce, on your 10th anniversary. Be there with your wife on that day, and bring your wedding contract." Amazed at how the Rebbe had agreed without any objections, the man left, and he was back there on his 10th anniversary to divorce his wife. Not long afterwards, he remarried, and before a year was out, he was the father of a beautiful girl. Indeed, every year after that, he became a father of another girl, until he had 6 girls, but no boy who would say Kaddish, and in despair, he went back to the Rebbe. This time, he was given an audience as soon as he entered the door. Back in the Rebbe's chamber, the smell of kugel struck him, and soon the Rebbe was standing offering him to taste some. Remembering the good luck it had brought him the first time in obtaining the Rebbe's approval, the man took a single bite, and at that very moment, the Rebbe again gave him permission to divorce his wife. By the time he had left his wife and 6 daughters, he was much poorer in silver and in spirit. But at last he was free to seek out his Kaddish. And in less than a year he was married again. This time his wish came true, and his wife's first child was a son. The man knew that he had been right all along to persevere for a son. Even at the price that he had paid, he had lavished love and gifts on him, and by the time the boy was 3 years old, he was recognized as a prodigy, and all who saw him predicted that he would be a great scholar in Torah. It happened that the chassid traveled by ship on business. He could not bear the thought of leaving his son behind, so he hired a tutor and brought the boy with him on the voyage. Then one day there was a storm at sea, and the boat started to sink. It all happened so fast that the man was not able to save his son. He watched in horror as the great wave carried the boy off, and that was the last he ever saw of him. So great was his grief that he almost welcomed death so that he could be with his son again. And just then the mast of the ship floated by, and the man's instinct to save himself took over. He grabbed it just as a giant wave picked up the mast and bore it across the water for many hours, until he found himself washed up on the distant shore. Eventually, the heartbroken father made his way back to his hometown, but he could hardly bear to break the terrible news to his wife, so he went to see the Rebbe first. This time, the Rebbe opened the door himself, and he recognized the man's grief at once. He gently led him to his study and gave him a seat. Then the Rebbe brought over a plate of food. "Would you like some kugel?" the rabbi asked, and the man, remembering all the misery of his divorces had brought on, whispered no, and began to weep, and he wept with all his heart. Then at last he looked up and heard the Rebbe say, "No, you may not have a get." This greatly confused the man, and he said, "I have not come to you for a get, far from it. I have had enough of divorces. After 2 divorces, I finally got the son of my dreams, and I have lost him due to my own foolishness in taking him with me on a dangerous voyage. If only it had been me and not him who had died." "Let me assure you," said the Rebbe, "that you have not been divorced even once. It is only now that you have requested your first divorce, nor do you have any children." "What do you mean?" the man shouted. "My first divorce was many years ago. Oh, and if I had only not been divorced, my life would not have been ruined." "Here," said the Rebbe, picking up a copy of a newspaper and showing it to the man, and he saw that it was the same day that he had come in asking for his first divorce. And then he realized that only a short time had passed while he was there, and it had seemed like half a lifetime. And he realized that a strange miracle had taken place, for he had seen the futility of divorcing his wife, whose only flaw was the failure to give him a son. The man was awed by what had happened to him, and he took leave of the Rebbe. So too did he remain married, and before the 12th year of marriage had passed, he was the father of a fine son, much to his amazement, and he loved that son with all his heart, and from the day the boy was old enough to understand, he made him take a vow that he would never set foot in a ship. So too did the boy keep his vow, and his life flourished. And when the merchant died, his son said Kaddish for him and always kept his memory alive. This story comes from Gabriel's Palace, Jewish Mystical Tales, selected and retold by Howard Schwartz.